What if the real secret to confidence, stamina, and deeper connection in a man's private life isn't found in pills or shortcuts, but in something as simple as what he applies to his body before sleep? In the quiet hours, when the world is silent, and the mind finally slows down. Because tonight you're going to hear something most men never learn too late. And it might completely shift how you think about performance, intimacy, and control over your own energy. There is a growing conversation, often whispered but rarely explained properly, about how nighttime rituals affect not just sleep quality, but hormonal balance, circulation, stress recovery, and ultimately the way a man shows up in his most private and intimate moments. The idea of a nighttime oil routine might sound overly simple at first, even irrelevant to something as complex as performance. But when you break down what actually happens in the body during deep relaxation, the picture becomes much clearer. A man's body is not just reacting in the moment of intimacy, it is reflecting days, sometimes weeks of accumulated stress, poor circulation, mental fatigue, and hormonal imbalance. And this is where nighttime becomes powerful, because it is the only time the body fully shifts into repair mode, where nervous system recovery, blood flow regulation, and hormonal recalibration actually take place without interruption. The use of oils in this context is not about magic or instant transformation, but about signal. The body responds deeply to touch, warmth, and absorption. When certain natural oils are used in a structured nighttime routine, they can help encourage relaxation, reduce physical tension, and support circulation in areas that matter for masculine vitality. What most men underestimate is that performance is not only about desire, it is about flow. Blood flow, nerve responsiveness, and mental clarity all play a role in how the body responds under intimacy. When stress is high, when sleep is poor, when the nervous system is constantly overstimulated, the body shifts into survival mode, and in that state, performance naturally becomes inconsistent. A nighttime oil routine, when done consistently, becomes less about the oil itself and more about the ritual of slowing down. The act of taking time for your body sends a powerful psychological signal. It tells the nervous system that the day is over, that tension can release, and that the body can shift from external pressure to internal repair. Many men live in a constant state of activation, scrolling, working, thinking, worrying, and that chronic mental load directly affects intimacy more than they realize. The oil routine is simply a tool to interrupt that cycle. Certain oils are traditionally known for their warming and relaxing properties, often used in massage practices that focus on circulation and muscle recovery. When applied with intention, especially in a slow, mindful manner, they can help reduce tightness in the lower body, hips, and lower back, areas that are deeply connected to comfort and physical confidence. But the real benefit is not just physical. It is psychological anchoring. The brain begins to associate this routine with calm, rest, and grounding. Over time, that association influences how quickly the body can transition into relaxation, which is essential for deeper rest and hormonal balance. Sea leave itself is one of the most underrated factors in male performance. During deep sleep, the body regulates testosterone, repairs vascular function, and resets dopamine sensitivity, all of which directly influence drive and responsiveness. When sleep is shallow or inconsistent, these systems do not fully recover, and the effects slowly accumulate. A nighttime oil routine acts as a bridge into better sleep, especially when it reduces muscle tension and mental restlessness before bed. It is not the oil alone that creates change, but the ritual that prepares the body for recovery. There is also an emotional layer that often goes unspoken. Many men carry stress silently, and that stress does not disappear when the lights go off. It settles into the body. The shoulders, the jaw, the lower back, and even the pelvic region can hold tension from unresolved pressure and emotional strain. When a man engages in a consistent self-care ritual, even something as simple as mindful application of oil combined with slow breathing, it creates a moment where the body is acknowledged instead of ignored. That acknowledgement builds internal awareness. And internal awareness is directly linked to control, timing, and presence in intimate moments. Performance is not just physical reaction, it is presence. And presence is built in quiet moments like these, where there is no performance pressure, no expectation, just attention to the body and its signals. Over time, this can influence confidence in subtle but meaningful ways. Not through exaggeration or unrealistic promises, but through consistency, regulation, and better recovery. What makes this approach interesting is that it shifts the focus away from urgency and toward maintenance. Instead of chasing improvement in the moment, it builds conditions where the body naturally performs better because it is less burdened. And that is where most men overlook the real foundation of intimacy. It is not about forcing outcomes. It is about creating the internal environment where those outcomes happen more naturally. What often goes unnoticed is how deeply the male nervous system is shaped by repetition, not just action but timing, environment, and emotional state surrounding that action. And when we look at nighttime as more than just rest but as a neurological reset window, the idea of a simple oil routine begins to carry a much deeper meaning. Because the body does not separate physical recovery from emotional recovery. Everything is processed together during sleep, and whatever state you enter that process in becomes part of how effectively you restore yourself. If a man goes to bed still carrying tension, overstimulation from screens, unresolved stress, or even quiet frustration, the body does not fully reset. It partially recovers while still holding on to internal noise, and over time that incomplete recovery begins to show up in energy levels, consistency, and even intimate responsiveness. This is where consistency becomes more important than intensity. Many men look for dramatic solutions, but the nervous system responds far more strongly to predictable patterns. When a simple nighttime oil routine is repeated regularly, especially in a calm environment with reduced stimulation, it becomes a conditioning signal. The brain begins to associate that specific sensory experience with transition, from alertness to relaxation, from tension to recovery. This is not just psychological comfort, it is neurological patterning. The same way athletes develop pre-performance rituals to stabilize focus, the body can be trained into deeper relaxation states through repeated cues. Touch plays a central role in this process. Human skin is one of the most responsive sensory systems, and when it is stimulated in a slow, controlled, and non-urgent manner, it activates parasympathetic pathways, the same pathways responsible for rest, digestion, and recovery. In simple terms, the body begins to shift out of survival mode. For many men living under chronic stress, this shift does not happen automatically at night anymore. The mind continues to process work, responsibilities, expectations, and even subtle emotional pressures. That is why intentional physical routines matter, because they give the nervous system permission to slow down in a structured way, rather than hoping it happens naturally. There is also a subtle but powerful relationship between circulation and confidence. When the body is tense, blood flow becomes restricted in certain muscle groups, especially in areas connected to posture, movement, and core stability. This does not only affect physical comfort, it influences how a man feels in his own body. Confidence is not just mental belief, it is also physical ease. When the body feels open, relaxed, and responsive, the mind interprets that as strength. When the body feels tight or fatigued, the mind often interprets that as hesitation or reduced energy. A nighttime routine that focuses on relaxation and gentle stimulation helps reduce that internal friction, gradually improving how the body feels at rest, and by extension, how it performs when it matters. Another overlooked factor is breath. Most men underestimate how much breathing patterns influence intimacy, endurance, and control. Under stress, breathing becomes shallow and rapid, keeping the body in a heightened state of alertness. But during relaxation routines, especially when combined with slow, repetitive physical application of oil, breathing naturally begins to deepen. This shift in oxygen intake directly affects heart rate variability, which is a key marker of nervous system balance. A more regulated nervous system does not just improve sleep quality, it also improves emotional stability and physical responsiveness in high-pressure moments. Over time, these small nightly patterns begin to stack. One night does very little on its own, but 30 nights, 60 nights, 90 nights create a completely different baseline in the body. Men often look for immediate results, but the real transformation in performance is cumulative. It is built in layers, not moments. The oil itself is not the source of change. It is the anchor for repetition. And repetition is what reprograms physiological response. There is also a psychological shift that begins to occur when a man invests in his own recovery rather than only focusing on output. In many modern lifestyles, men are constantly in a cycle of doing, producing, and performing, but rarely in a cycle of restoring. This imbalance creates internal fatigue that does not always show up as physical exhaustion, but as reduced motivation, inconsistent drive, or emotional detachment. When a nighttime ritual is introduced, even something as simple as a slow, mindful routine, it creates a counterbalance. It tells the mind that rest is also part of strength, not something separate from it. And this is where intimacy is indirectly strengthened. Because real connection, whether emotional or physical, requires presence. Presence cannot exist in a body that is constantly overworked or mentally scattered. The more regulated the nervous system becomes, the easier it is for attention to remain steady, for sensation to be processed more clearly, and for response to feel more natural rather than forced or rushed. What is often misunderstood about male performance is that it is not just about stimulation, it is about regulation. The ability to shift between states, from stress to calm, from activity to stillness, from control to ease. A nighttime oil routine becomes a training ground for that shift. It teaches the body, slowly and quietly, how to let go. As these nightly patterns continue over time, something more subtle begins to happen that most men never consciously notice. But they feel it in the way they carry themselves, in how they respond under pressure, and in how naturally they move through intimacy without the same internal friction they once had. Because once the nervous system becomes more regulated through consistent nighttime recovery rituals, the change is no longer about effort, it becomes about baseline state. And baseline state is everything. At a deeper level, intimacy is not just a physical exchange, it is a reflection of emotional safety, internal stability, and how comfortable a man is in his own body when there is no distraction and no external validation to rely on. Many performance struggles are not purely physical. They are layered with subtle psychological tension, fear of judgment, pressure to perform, or internalized expectations built over time. When the body is constantly in a stressed or overstimulated state, these psychological layers become louder. But when the body begins to consistently enter deep rest states through structured nighttime routines, those psychological layers begin to soften because the nervous system is no longer interpreting everything as urgency or pressure. This is where long-term change becomes noticeable. A man who once felt inconsistent or mentally distracted during intimate moments may start noticing that his attention feels steadier, not because he is trying harder, but because his anxiety has reduced. His ability to stay present improves because his body is no longer fighting against accumulated fatigue or unresolved stress signals. That presence is not something that can be forced. It is something that emerges when the internal environment becomes stable enough to support it. Another important shift happens in self-perception. When a man begins to invest in his own recovery through simple, consistent rituals, he starts to develop a different relationship with his body. Instead of viewing it only as something that must perform, it becomes something that is also cared for, maintained, and understood. That shift might seem small, but psychologically it is powerful. It reduces internal pressure and replaces it with awareness. And awareness is far more sustainable than pressure when it comes to long-term confidence and performance. There is also a connection between nighttime recovery and emotional availability. When the nervous system is constantly overloaded, emotional responsiveness tends to narrow. A person may become more reactive, less patient, or emotionally distant without realizing it. But when recovery improves, emotional range often expands again. This matters in intimacy because a connection is not only physical coordination, it is emotional synchronization. When a man is more regulated internally, he is more capable of reading subtle cues, responding with presence rather than tension, and staying grounded even in heightened moments of closeness. Over time, the body begins to learn a new rhythm. Nights become a signal for restoration instead of collapse. Sleep becomes deeper, not just in duration, but in quality. Morning energy becomes more stable rather than fragmented. And in that improved foundation, performance naturally becomes more consistent because it is no longer being built on depletion. It is being built on recovery. It is important to understand that none of this works as an instant transformation. The body does not respond to intention alone. It responds to repetition. A single routine can calm the system for a night, but long-term change requires consistency that teaches the nervous system what to expect. And when the body learns that calm, recovery, and relaxation are normal parts of its daily cycle, it stops resisting them. That is where real improvement begins to feel effortless rather than forced. In the end, the so-called nighttime oil routine is not about oil at all. It is about reclaiming a moment in the day where the body is allowed to reset without interruption, where touch becomes a grounding signal, where breathing slows without demand, and where the mind is gently separated from the noise of the day. It is a reminder that performance is not built in the moment it is needed. It is built in the quiet hours when no one is watching, when nothing is expected, and when the body is finally given permission to recover fully. And when a man consistently honors that process, something fundamental shifts, not just in performance, but in presence, confidence, emotional steadiness. And the quiet assurance that comes from knowing his body is no longer running on exhaustion, but on restoration. That is the real transformation, not a dramatic change, but a gradual return to balance that supports every part of intimacy more naturally, more steadily, and more sustainably over time.